The morning sky over western Germany shimmered like polished steel. It was March 24, 1944, the day the Luftwaffe realized the war in the air was about to change forever. At 25,000 feet, the contrails of hundreds of B-17s and B-24s stretched east toward Berlin like chalk lines drawn across the heavens. For the first time, the bomber crews were not alone. Beneath their wings, darting in perfect formation, flew sleek silver Predators, the P-51 Mustangs. Their arrival over the Reich that morning stunned even the most battle-hardened German aces. Below, in the ready rooms of Jagdgeschwader 26, pilots of the Luftwaffe's finest squadrons stared at the new aircraft through binoculars. "They're coming with the bombers," one pilot murmured in disbelief. The idea seemed impossible. Until now, American escort fighters had to turn back at the Rhine, their fuel tanks dry long before the bombers reached Germany's industrial heartland. The rest of the journey, those terrifying hours over Schweinfurt, Regensburg and Bremen, had always been the Luftwaffe's hunting ground. But now, as the Mustangs appeared high above the bomber streams, sleek and shining in the sun, that sanctuary was gone. From the cockpit of his Bf 109G, Oberleutnant Hans Eckhardt banked toward the formation, expecting to carve through defenseless bombers as before. But before he could close the distance, the sky erupted in flashes. The Mustangs dove out of the sun, cannons blazing, their engines screaming with a sound unlike anything the Germans had heard before. In seconds, his squadron's neat V formation was shredded. Tracer rounds stitched across the air. One Mi-109 burst into flames and spiraled earthward. Over the radio, panicked voices shouted warnings. The Americans had escorts all the way to Berlin. Dramatized composite. What the German pilots didn't know was that this transformation had begun nearly a year earlier in Detroit at the North American Aviation plant. In 1943, engineers under Edgar Schmood and Raymond Rice had achieved what both sides had thought impossible: a long-range, high-altitude fighter that could fly deep into enemy territory and still fight on equal terms. The key lay in a British innovation, the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, adapted by Packard Motor Company in the United States. When mated to the Mustang's airframe, the result was a machine that could climb faster, dive harder, and fly farther than any other fighter in existence. The P-51's lines were pure efficiency, laminar flow wings that sliced through the air with minimal drag, a bubble canopy, giving pilots perfect visibility, and internal fuel capacity, extended by drop tanks that could be jettisoned after escort duty. Its range now exceeded 1,600 miles. That meant it could fly from bases in England, escort bombers to Berlin and back, and still dogfight at altitude. To the Luftwaffe, it was unthinkable. Their Messerschmitts could barely stay airborne for an hour at combat throttle. As the bombers pressed toward their targets that morning, German radar stations near Münster and Kassel tracked them with growing alarm. Each blip was now accompanied by smaller, faster echoes, fighters that refused to peel away. Unidentified escort fighters, remaining with bombers beyond expected radius, read one report transmitted to Luftwaffe command. At Karenhall, Hermann Göring received the message in silence. His once invincible air defense network was being penetrated by an American machine that defied his entire air strategy. "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin," he would later say, "I knew the war was lost." For the pilots in the P-51s, the mission was simple but perilous: protect the bombers, destroy the hunters. Major Donald Blakesley of the 4th Fighter Group led his men into the maelstrom that day. "Stay tight, stay high. Hit them before they hit the bombers," he ordered. The Mustangs moved like wolves guarding a herd, peeling off in pairs to chase down attackers. When the first formation of FW-190s dove toward the B-17s, the Mustangs met them head-on. The air became a blur of motion, rolling scissors, corkscrews, and vertical dives that pushed engines and bodies to the limit. Captain Clarence "Bud" Anderson, flying Old Crow, locked onto a German ace who tried to break through the bomber line. The Mustang's 650 caliber machine guns opened up in a roar, shells tearing across the enemy fuselage. Flames erupted. The German fighter tumbled into cloud. "He never saw us coming," Anderson recalled later. "We could finally take the fight to them on their own turf." Below, the cities of central Germany trembled as bombs fell in waves. Rail yards, oil refineries, and aircraft plants disappeared under columns of smoke. For years, German industry had survived by moving production east out of reach of Allied escorts, but now there was nowhere to hide. The Mustangs ensured that the bombers could strike, retreat, and return the next day. It was industrial warfare at full stride, a contest not just of courage but of fuel, range, and metal. In factories across America, the Mustang's creation had become a symbol of precision and scale. Women riveters in Inglewood and Dallas assembled fuselages in endless lines, guided by templates designed to the thousandth of an inch. Packard technicians in Detroit hand-tested every Merlin engine, polishing each cylinder head until it gleamed. The airplane was both art and engineering, mass-produced beauty built for destruction. The Germans, watching its silver silhouette slash through the clouds, called it der lange Arm der Bomber, the long arm of the bombers. As the Luftwaffe scrambled to respond, its once feared Jagdgeschwader units began to collapse under exhaustion and losses. Pilots with 200 kills now faced rookies in superior machines. The Mustang could climb from 10,000 to 20,000 feet in less than 5 minutes. Its cruising speed exceeded 370 miles per hour. When Mi-109s tried to dive away, the Mustangs followed, faster in descent and steadier in pullout. German ground controllers could only watch as their squadrons vanished from radar screens one by one. At airfields in France, wreckage piled high. Shot-down FW-190s were inspected by Allied teams, who found bullet holes clustered across engines and cockpits, evidence of precision marksmanship from high-speed pursuits. The Mustangs had not just extended Allied range, they had annihilated the Luftwaffe's ability to mass forces. The sky that once belonged to Germany now belonged to the Americans. Back at base, B-17 and B-24 crews returned in shock. For the first time, they had completed missions with minimal losses. It was like having angels on the wings, one gunner said as he stepped down from his bomber. Pilots embraced their Mustang escorts, mud-streaked, exhausted, grinning through smoke and sweat. The myth of German air superiority had cracked, and everyone on the tarmac knew it. For the German engineers studying captured P-51 wrecks, disbelief turned into grim respect. They examined the laminar wing profiles, the fuel management system, and the high-altitude superchargers, marvels of mechanical genius. "It is the perfect fighter," one designer wrote in a report to Messerschmitt headquarters. "We cannot match it with what we have," dramatized Composite. By sunset, the airfields of Western Germany lay silent. Smoke curled upward from burned-out hangars and the twisted remains of Mi-109s. The Luftwaffe's aces, men who had once hunted unescorted bombers with impunity, now found themselves hunted instead. They had met their match in a machine born of mathematics, metallurgy, and unyielding ambition. And as the last Mustangs turned for home, their wingtips glowing red in the dying light, the radio chatter of despair spread through German command posts. Something fundamental had changed. The sky itself no longer belonged to them. But for the Allies, one question remained unanswered. How had a single fighter managed to reach the heart of the Reich, strike, and still return home without refueling? The answer to the Luftwaffe's nightmare lay buried deep within the polished skin of the Mustang. Beneath its gleaming aluminum surface, invisible to the eye, was a revolutionary marriage of aerodynamics and engineering genius. The key was not just power, it was endurance. German engineers had long believed that no single-seat fighter could escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. The math of fuel, altitude, and drag made it impossible. But Edgar Schmuid, North American's chief designer, had rewritten those equations. His team developed the laminar flow wing, a shape that delayed airflow separation, reducing drag by nearly 30%. It was subtle, almost art, a wing that looked ordinary but breathed efficiency. When combined with the Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the Mustang became the first fighter that could truly stretch its reach across Europe. Inside the Merlin's heart, two-stage, two-speed superchargers compressed thin air into power at 30,000 feet. This engine, adapted from Britain's Spitfire but refined in Detroit, allowed the Mustang to match any German fighter at high altitude. Engineers at Packard replaced British hand-fitting with American precision manufacturing, each part interchangeable, each engine identical to the next. Assembly lines ran day and night under floodlights, their rhythm matching the heartbeat of the war itself. Mechanics in England described the Merlin as a machine that breathes courage, and when its throttle opened, The sound echoed across the airfields like a promise. Fuel was the final secret. Every gallon mattered. American engineers restructured the Mustang's internal tanks to balance perfectly around the center of gravity, allowing longer flight without upsetting stability. Then came the innovation that changed everything: drop tanks. These external fuel pods attached under the wings could be jettisoned once empty, giving the Mustang the endurance to fly from England to Berlin, dogfight for half an hour, and return home. The Germans dismissed the concept at first. They thought such tanks would rupture or catch fire in combat. But in practice, they gave the Allies what no other air force had achieved: strategic reach through tactical precision. When the first Mustangs appeared deep over Germany in early 1944, the shock rippled through every echelon of the Luftwaffe. Reports arrived daily from radar stations, describing escort fighters maintaining position beyond anticipated fuel limits. Commanders demanded answers. How do they still fly? One demanded during a briefing near Brunswick. Analysts speculated that the Americans were staging from secret bases on the continent or refueling in mid-air, both impossible at the time. The truth, however, was simpler and far more terrifying. The Mustang had erased the last geographic advantage Germany possessed. The decisive test came on March 6, 1944, the first daylight raid on Berlin. Over 300 bombers and 700 fighters thundered eastward in one of the largest air armadas ever assembled. The Luftwaffe scrambled everything it had left: nearly 700 interceptors rising from airfields at Wunstorf, Rechlin and Jüterbog. The sky over central Germany became a boiling cauldron of contrails and gunfire. German aces like Walter Dahl and Wilhelm Batz led their squadrons into the inferno, confident they could tear apart the bomber formations as they had done before. But the moment they climbed to intercept altitude, they saw the impossible. Mustangs in perfect escort formation, weaving protectively around the bombers like silver phantoms. Major George Preddy of the 352nd Fighter Group dove from 30,000 feet, throttling his P-51 into a vertical plunge. His target, a cluster of FW-190s streaking toward the B-17s. The Mustang's speedometer climbed past 500 miles per hour, the airframe trembling but steady. As he pulled the trigger, the 6 Browning M2s spat a line of fire that cut through the enemy formation. One Focke-Wulf exploded mid-air, another disintegrated into fragments. Preddy rolled and climbed, already seeking his next target. "We owned the sky that day," he later told ground crews, his voice flat with exhaustion. For the German pilots, it was chaos. Their tactics, high-speed dives and slashing attacks, depended on surprise and numerical advantage. But the Mustangs were everywhere, diving from altitude, climbing out of cloud, appearing where no escort had ever been before. Radio channels filled with desperation. "They are behind us. They are everywhere," shouted one pilot before static consumed his transmission. Within an hour, the Luftwaffe lost nearly 70 aircraft. The Americans, for the first time in the war, lost fewer than 10. The balance of the air war had flipped in a single morning. On the ground, German engineers at Messerschmitt and Focke-Wulf studied combat reports in disbelief. They dissected captured P-51 wrecks recovered from crash sites in Holland and Belgium, measuring every inch of their construction. The laminar wing baffled them. It produced almost no visible airflow disturbance, even at high speed. Its seamless rivet lines and precisely contoured panels reflected light so evenly that it reduced visibility from above, a form of accidental stealth. "It is not only a fighter," one engineer remarked. "It is a philosophy of flight." Their own attempts to counter it, including the Me-410 and the TR-152, came too late and in too few numbers. The psychological impact was devastating. For years, Luftwaffe pilots had drawn pride from dominance over their skies. Now even the heart of Germany felt exposed. The bomber crews they once preyed upon now moved confidently under the protection of the Mustangs. In the words of one German ace captured later that year, "We had no sky left, only their horizon." The fear spread beyond the airfields, through towns, factories, even among civilians who once watched their own fighters climb to glory. Now they watched them burn in the clouds. Meanwhile, the Allied command exploited the advantage ruthlessly. Long-range escort meant precision raids could be repeated day after day. Synthetic fuel plants, ball-bearing factories and rail networks, the arteries of the German war machine, were pulverized. The once feared flak corridors became killing zones, not for the bombers but for the defenders. German mechanics worked feverishly through the nights, patching bullet-riddled aircraft with salvaged aluminum, only to watch them destroyed again at dawn. The Mustang had transformed air superiority from a tactical contest into an industrial verdict. Every element of the Mustang's performance was a testament to collaborative ingenuity. The British provided the Merlin. Americans supplied production and logistics. Pilots from across the Allied world flew it. Yanks, Poles, Czechs, Canadians, Aussies. Together, they forged the weapon that would bring the Reich to its knees. In workshops from Inglewood to Duxford, thousands of unnamed machinists and riveters made possible what no strategist had dared to dream. A single-engine fighter, capable of carrying democracy's vengeance across an entire continent. By late 1944, the Mustang had earned its reputation not just as a protector but as a hunter. Its missions shifted from escorting bombers to sweeping the skies clean. Strafing runs destroyed locomotives, convoys, and airfields. German pilots began to hide their planes under camouflage nets, terrified of being caught on takeoff. The once proud aces of the Luftwaffe now flew reactive sorties, ambushing only when weather grounded the escorts. The myth of invincibility was gone. On a cold December morning, a Luftwaffe veteran walked along the wreckage of an airfield near Kassel. The tarmac was littered with the skeletal remains of fighters destroyed before they could even lift off. In the distance, the faint hum of Merlin engines faded westward. He muttered quietly to himself, "They escort, they hunt, and they never leave." That line would echo across captured interrogation transcripts months later, a summary of what the German Air Force had come to fear most, the unstoppable reach of the Mustang. The long-range fighter had not only broken the Luftwaffe's spine, it had reshaped the very geometry of air warfare. Battles once measured in miles now spanned nations. With each new sortie, Germany's defenses shrank while Allied horizons expanded. But even as the Mustang dominated the sky, its story was not yet complete. The aircraft's brilliance would push men and machines to their absolute limits and reveal a cost measured not just in metal and fuel, but in human endurance itself. By the spring of 1945, the sky over Germany no longer belonged to the Luftwaffe. It was the realm of the Mustang, a cold, relentless kingdom of polished aluminum and roaring engines. From the Dutch coast to the mountains of Bavaria, the sound of the Merlin had become a signal of inevitability. For German civilians, it meant the bombers were near. For the last remaining fighter pilots, it meant they were prey. The Americans called it air supremacy. But to those on the ground, it felt more like an iron curtain descending from the clouds. The P-51s swept low over rail lines and highways, their machine guns sparking across columns of trucks fleeing east. The once invincible German air defense system had collapsed into scattered pockets of desperation. On the ground, inside shattered hangars, German engineers and mechanics still tried to fight back with innovation. They worked feverishly on jet projects, the Me-262, the Arado 234, machines of breathtaking promise but impossible timing. They studied captured Mustang wrecks, tracing every cable and fuel line, measuring every contour. They couldn't understand how such simplicity achieved such perfection. The Mustang's structure had no unnecessary weight, no wasted effort. Every rivet had purpose, every curve a reason. In quiet frustration, one engineer reportedly said, "We built for brilliance. They built for endurance." It was the most painful truth of the war. The Allied miracle was not magic, it was manufacturing. While German science strained for breakthroughs, American factories delivered constancy. At North American Aviation, the assembly lines in Inglewood and Dallas were working 3 shifts, turning out more than 500 Mustangs each month. Thousands of women stood shoulder to shoulder, riveting wings, wiring instrument panels, and polishing canopies under fluorescent light. Their work wasn't glamorous, but it was decisive. In war rooms, generals spoke of strategy and tactics. In factories, workers created victory one bolt at a time. The Mustang became a monument to collective effort, human endurance multiplied by machinery. In England, the airfields of East Anglia and Lincolnshire throbbed with life. Each dawn began with the cough of engines and the shriek of spinning props. Mechanics scrambled across muddy runways to check coolant levels, patch bullet holes, and rearm guns with belts of 50 caliber ammunition. Pilots, still half asleep, climbed into cockpits lined with frost. They weren't thinking of glory, they were thinking of survival. Every mission carried the same unspoken calculation. Would the Merlin keep running, and would the drop tanks last long enough to bring them home? For many, the answer was no. The Mustang's legend of dominance came with a cruel cost. Escorting bombers meant flying straight through walls of flak and diving into chaos to protect slow, lumbering formations. Dozens of young men never returned, their wrecks scattered across Europe, fields burning where courage met gravity. In debriefs, survivors often spoke in monotones, exhausted and numb. "We made it," they'd say. But behind the words lay an understanding that each victory thinned their own ranks further. Heroism in the Mustang was not a choice. It was routine. Yet even amid loss, there was transformation. The P-51 turned the air war into something psychological. German morale, once sustained by the myth of air defense, cracked under the weight of helplessness. Civilians watched their cities burn, while their fighters vanished in smoke trails overhead. The Reich had always promised protection. Now even the heavens betrayed that lie. Allied intelligence units later found diary fragments from Luftwaffe ground crews, describing the dread of hearing the Mustang's engine note before dawn. "It starts as a hum," one wrote. "Then it grows until the ground shakes and we know they are already above us." For the Allies, the Mustang's impact went far beyond the tactical. It became the spine of strategic bombing itself. Where once missions ended in catastrophic losses, they now returned with precision results. The oil fields at Pölitz, the ball-bearing plants at Schweinfurt, the aircraft factories at Regensburg, all reduced to twisted skeletons of steel. The P-51s had not only protected the bombers, but multiplied their effectiveness. Each mission brought Germany's industrial pulse closer to silence. The Luftwaffe's final desperate counterattacks, the defense of the Reich operations, became funerals for their own elite. When the war in Europe ended, the Mustang's legacy extended far beyond the wreckage. Pilots who survived the long campaigns described the aircraft with reverence usually reserved for living things. "She took care of me," one said while touching a scarred fuselage. They spoke of how the plane responded like an extension of the body, how its controls felt intuitive, almost alive. The bond between man and machine had reached a new depth, born not from romance but from necessity. In that connection lay the beginning of modern aerial warfare, where precision and endurance mattered more than brute force. Even Germany, in defeat, learned from its enemy's creation. After the war, captured Mustangs were studied by engineers in Europe and Japan. The lessons of its design, laminar flow, balanced fuel distribution, and modular production became blueprints for post-war aircraft across the world. The Soviet MiG and the British Hawker jetline both bore faint echoes of the Mustang's aerodynamic legacy. What began as a weapon had become a teacher. In American hangars, mechanics and engineers rebuilt damaged Mustangs for new purposes. Some would race in peacetime competitions, others would serve as trainers for the next generation. Yet their aura remained untouchable. Veterans returning home often said they could still hear the hum of the Merlin in their dreams, a sound tied forever to the moment when the tide of war turned. To them, the Mustang was more than an airplane. It was proof that freedom could fly faster and farther than tyranny ever could. The war had proven one brutal truth. Domination of the skies determined the fate of the ground. The P-51 had not won the conflict alone, but it had made victory possible. Its endurance gave life to Allied strategy, its reach strangled the enemy's hope, and its presence shattered a myth that had endured since 1939, that Germany's air force was invincible. It wasn't the strongest that triumphed, but the one that could endure longer, reach farther, and adapt faster. When Germany finally surrendered in May 1945, the last echoes of battle faded beneath a silent sky. The ruins below bore witness to the cost, the cities, the soldiers, the civilians. But high above, in the quiet of an airfield near Leiston, a single Mustang stood ready on the tarmac, its propeller still, its wings streaked with soot and rain. A ground crewman wiped the nose art, Old Crow, with a rag, whispering something that only he could hear. The war was over, but the legend remained. Years later, historians would write that the P-51 Mustang was not simply a machine. It was a message written in aluminum and courage. It told every nation that technology could be a form of destiny, and that freedom, once armed with ingenuity, could cross any horizon. As one post-war analyst put it, the Mustang did not just escort bombers, it escorted civilization through its darkest sky. And in that sky, stretching endlessly eastward over a defeated Reich, the silver wings of the Mustang still glimmered in memory, proof that endurance, not invincibility, decides who owns the air.